Hey, you know what's better than fighting Nazis?
Not having Nazis around.
I was going to say defeating Nazis, but yeah, sure.
Incoming broadcast. You're listening to .fm.
Welcome to .fm. I'm your host, Danielle Gonzalez.
I'm Claire.
And today, we're talking about Alan Turing.
Alan Turing.
What do you know about Alan Turing, Claire?
Very little.
Yeah?
Like, as in, I've heard his name. I know he was born in Maida Vale, London, to Julius and Ethel Turing.
No, you don't. You're reading ahead. Stop.
No, I actually don't know much about him. Tell me all about Alan Turing today.
Yeah.
I'm excited to learn.
Well, Alan was born in Maida Vale in London to a Julius and Ethel Turing on June 23rd, 1912. Alan's father, Julius, worked for the Indian Civil Service Department of the British Raj government, and Julius was the son of clergyman Reverend John Robert Turing. The paternal side of the family were a Scottish merchant family.
Okay.
Alan's mother, Ethel, her maiden name Stoney, was the daughter of chief engineer of Madras Railways, Edward Stoney. The Stoneys were an Anglo-Irish gentry family from West Ireland. In fact, Ethel actually spent a lot of her childhood in and around County Clare, Ireland, which is actually pretty close where the Irish branch of my family is from, in County Kerry. It's County Clare, I think, is the county just north of Kerry. So
When you say Indian Civil Service, the ICS, is that...
the British government of India.
Oh, okay.
Before like Gandhi and the British left India.
Got it.
Because this is pre-World War One, or right around World War One, pre-World War One, 1912.
Okay.
A couple months after the Titanic sank. Not that that's important to this story at all. It's not, but...
No? Oh.
So Alan's father, Julius, he worked for the British government of India. He was on leave at the time that Alan was born. So he was in London when Alan was born in Maida Vale. But Julius continued to work for the ICS throughout Alan's childhood. And so Alan's parents were frequently moving between England, specifically southeastern England, where they lived outside of London, and India. And when his parents were over in India, Alan and his siblings were left with a retired army couple in Hastings in East Sussex, which is where they were living when Alan was a kid.
So just like, here you go.
Yeah.
Here, stay with this dude.
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't find much about this specific family, but I assume that, they were neighbors and family friends. From ages 6 to 9, Alan attended St. Michael's Primary School in St. Leonard's-on-Sea. Little British villages have crazy names. I love it.
I know. They're so fun.
Alan attended a small primary school when he was, ages 6 to ages 9 in St. Leonard's-on-Sea in Hastings in East Sussex. In fact, the headmistress of that primary school actually kind of instantly recognized Alan's intelligence. She was later quoted as saying that she had clever boys and she had hardworking boys, but Alan is a genius.
I hope it doesn't go to his head.
Alan was smart. He was real smart, even as a kid. So when he was 10, back in 1922, Alan discovered a copy of the book Natural Wonders Every Child Should Know by Edwin Tenney Brewster. And Alan, was later quoted as saying that was the book that kind of opened his eyes to science and ignited his passion and curiosity around science itself. So in 1926, when he was 13, Alan attended an independent boarding school in Sherborne, Dorset, called the Sherborne School. He was actually pretty excited to attend this school. In fact, he was so determined to attend the school that the first day of term happened to coincide with the 1926 general strike that happened in Britain. And so, nobody was working during this time, including bus drivers. So Alan rode his bicycle 60 miles from Southampton to Sherborne.
Jesus.
Entirely by himself, completely unattended, and ended up actually staying overnight at an inn on the way there because he was so determined to go. Yeah, 13 years old.
Wow.
So, he was kind of fiercely independent. He was just this really smart kid. We mentioned that the headmistress at his primary school really kind of recognized his intelligence early on. And while that was true, his passion for math and science really didn't do him any favors at Sherborne. In fact, the teacher's kind of definition of education at Sherborne was one that was more focused on like the classics. The headmaster even wrote to Alan's parents.
If he is to stay at public school, he must aim at becoming educated. If he is to be solely a scientific specialist, he is wasting his time at a public school.
That was better than I would have done.
Excellent.
So he at Sherborne, like I think he kind of enjoyed his time, but the teachers were kind of like, you're not enough of a generalist. You're too nerdy.
You're too nerdy.
So, but undeterred, Alan kept at it. He really enjoyed his math and science, so he kept working at it. At 15 years old, he was solving advanced math problems without having prior studies in calculus. Like he was just intuiting calculus. He just kind of like intuitively understood it. So at 16, he discovered the work of Albert Einstein and not only just kind of understood Einstein's work, but actually even kind of deduced Einstein's questioning of some of Sir Isaac Newton's laws of motion.
Wow.
Not necessarily the laws of motion themselves, but like some of the specifics around it. Einstein sort of questioned. And Alan kind of deduced that on his own after reading a paper where that concept, like the idea of Einstein questioning it was never explicit in the paper. Alan just kind of like picked up on it. At 16 years old. So really smart kid. Like I cannot emphasize enough how intelligent Alan Turing was.
Yeah.
While he was at Sherborne, Alan met and became very close friends with a boy named Christopher Morcom, who has often been described as Alan's first love.
Aww.
I'm not sure if they ever had like a genuinely romantic relationship, but they definitely were very close. Teachers described them as inseparable, very close friends. So
Alan and Christopher.
Unfortunately, Christopher died pretty tragically in 1930 when Alan was like 18. They were both like 18 years old.
Wow.
Morcom had contracted years ago. He had contracted bovine tuberculosis from drinking some tainted cow's milk. And in 1930 ended up dying from complications from this condition. So
they only knew each other for probably a year or two?
They knew each other for about, I think, 5 years. It's this particular friendship, really, I think, provided an inspiration and motivation for a lot of Alan's work moving forward. In fact, in a letter he wrote to his mom after Christopher died, Alan wrote, "I am sure I could not have found anywhere another companion so brilliant and yet so charming and unconceited. I regarded my interest in my work and in such things as astronomy to which he introduced me as something to be shared with him. I know I must put as much energy, if not as much interest into my work as if he were alive, because that is what he would like me to do." So, nice. Really left an impact on Alan. In fact, some people have even suspected that Christopher's death was kind of the whole reason that Alan had the views on atheism and materialism that he did. And by materialism, I mean like specifically the philosophy of materialism, not, the aesthetic and what we think of today, but like there's an actual philosophy called materialism that posits that all things, even mental states, are a result of matter and material interactions. It's kind of like it's sort of tied to spirituality in a way. To kind of describe Alan's views on this, he later wrote in a letter to Christopher's mom, who, after Christopher died, he became pretty close with Christopher's mother. They wrote each other a lot, and kind of reminisced about Christopher and their relationship. But anyway, in a letter he wrote to Chris's mom, Alan writes, "I believe that spirit is really eternally connected with matter, but certainly not the same kind as the body. I consider that the body can hold on to a spirit whilst the body is alive and awake. The two are firmly connected. When the body is asleep, I cannot guess what happens, but when the body dies, the mechanism of the body holding the spirit is gone, and the spirit finds a new body sooner or later, perhaps immediately."
Wow.
So that's kind of what we mean when we talk about materialism in terms of the philosophy that Alan Turing held. In 1931, after leaving Shercombe, after graduating, Alan studied at King's College at Cambridge. He secured an £80 per year scholarship, which would equate to about £4,300 per year today.
Wow.
And I believe that was basically a full ride. Can you imagine if college were that cheap today?
Oh my God.
Thanks, Ronald Reagan.
Really solved the problems there.
Reagan ruins everything.
Uh-huh.
At 22 years old, Alan delivered his dissertation, which was called On the Gaussian Error Function, back in November 1934. So 22, he's already delivering a dissertation.
Yeah.
This particular dissertation ended up kind of proving a version of what's called the central limit theorem in probability theory. I am not going to explain that because I don't fully understand it myself.
Yeah, we're definitely not mathematicians here.
Yeah, I tried to get a basic understanding of probability theory and statistics theory and basic, computer theory when I was researching Alan Turing for this episode. And so much of it went way over my head that it's oh my God, I'm not even going to pretend to understand, what his dissertation on the Gaussian error function means.
Yeah.
What I do understand is that it was basically a seminal work, and it, essentially proved a version of what's called the central limit theorem that I don't fully get.
Okay.
The following year in 1935, Alan started his master's, which he completed 2 years later in 1937. He was also in 1935 elected a King's College Fellow on the strength of the aforementioned dissertation.
Cool.
So in 1936, Alan finished his 36-page paper called On Computable Numbers with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem. Fancy German word.
Oh, yeah.
And this particular 36-page paper would later become known as Turing's proof. It has since been described as easily the most influential math paper in history. John von Neumann said that the core concept of modern computers was due almost entirely to Turing's paper, Turing's proof.
So I can
Very
see
important paper.
I can see how these dots are starting to become connected now.
Yeah.
Now, okay, I know that you don't know what the central limit theorem is, but save us. Sorry, fellow mathematicians listening to this podcast. I shouldn't say fellow. I'm a voice coach. Look, okay, I'm going to stay in my lane. But what is the Entscheidungsproblem?
The Entscheidungsproblem?
That's it.
So the Entscheidungsproblem is it's one of those fancy compound German words. It's really big. I believe it means the decision problem.
Okay.
I think. But the origin of Entscheidungsproblem comes from this 17th century mathematician named Gottfried Leibniz, who he built a mechanical calculator, in the late 1600s. And, after building this mechanical calculator, he dreamt about potentially building this hypothetical machine where you could manipulate symbols on a keyboard to determine truth values of mathematical statements, basically whether
a calculator,
like a scientific calculator.
Yep.
You could plug in a fancy math problem and it could maybe not necessarily tell you the answer, but at least tell you whether or not it was a valid problem, whether it would, be solvable or not.
Okay.
And, Gottfried determined that the first step to creating this hypothetical machine was to create a formal language that all of these machines would use to solve math problems. And so he started creating a language that we now call binary.
Wait, this Gottfried guy?
Yeah, he's arguably the father of binary.
The binary what?
Yeah, binary language. Well, we think of binary language as like digital because
exactly. I didn't really like what this is like. What you said, 1600s or something?
Yeah, late 1600s. But like we think of binary as being like a digital thing because it uses electric signals, as being on or off, ones or zeros. But really, you can have a mechanical binary system that just it has to do is toggle between two different states. In fact, I've seen YouTube videos where people have made calculators using water, and logic gates whether, a thing is filled or not filled. So binary as a language is simply true or false, 1 or 0. So it doesn't have to be digital. It doesn't have to be electrical. So and Gottfried kind of started the creation of this language that would evolve to be computer binary, but he's considered like the father of binary. Anyway, fast forwarding ahead.
I like it when I get you on your high horse and you just go on these tangents.
Yeah, well,
anyway.
I feel like this whole podcast is basically tangents, but anyway. So in 1928, there were a couple of, I don't know if they were American or British, but there were a couple of mathematicians, David Hilbert and Wilhelm Ackermann. Ackermann may have been German. I don't know. But either way, in 1928, they created a challenge that sort of asks for an algorithm that considers whether an input mathematical statement is universally valid and gives an answer yes or no. And this challenge is called the Entscheidungsproblem. So that's what the Entscheidungsproblem. It was basically extrapolating on Gottfried's work, dreaming about this universal machine, and creating a challenge asking if such a machine could exist, basically.
Okay.
Turing's proof, this 36-page paper on computable numbers with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem, basically shows that a general solution to the Entscheidungsproblem is impossible. And it basically assumes that the, quote, intuitive notion of effectively calculable is inherently part of the functions computable by what Alan called he didn't call it a Turing machine. He called it an automatic machine or a machine, but it would later become known as a Turing machine, which is, a hypothetical machine which is based on a concept of infinite memory, in this case, a, infinitely long tape of paper that would be capable of implementing any set of computational rules or, an algorithm. An algorithm in mathematics is just a set of computational rules. He basically proved that the Entscheidungsproblem doesn't have a universal yes or no answer.
Okay.
I don't fully understand why that's so important, but it is so important. The basis of computer theory is built on that particular work. In fact, there was another mathematician named Alonzo Church who, the year before Alan finished his 36-page paper, Church also released a paper that also kind of disproved Entscheidungsproblem, but in a different, used a different method. And so the two, Alan Turing's paper and Alonzo Church's paper, have been combined into the Church-Turing thesis, is what it's called. These two papers were fundamental in the field of computer theory. So, in fact, from late 1936 to 1938, Alan actually spent most of his time at Princeton University studying under Alonzo Church, working on his doctorate. So in June of 1938, he obtained said doctorate. He got his PhD in mathematics at Princeton. And his dissertation for his doctorate was called Systems of Logic Based on Ordinals, which introduced entirely new concepts in mathematics like ordinal logic, was invented by Alan Turing in this paper, relative computing, and he also further refined his hypothetical Turing machines to be able to study problems that they otherwise could not solve by being augmented with a hypothetical module for these hypothetical machines that he called oracles.
Hey, Dany. So you're throwing a lot at me.
I'm throwing a lot at everybody. Yeah. I mean, Alan Turing, who's an important guy.
I need your help. And
Sure.
I think I can speak on the viewers' behalf here too. Can you just simplify that whole thing? Can you start again from the top there? School and research. He studied at this Cambridge thing, and like he made this central limit theorem.
His proving the central limit theorem.
That was the basis for the Turing machine.
The Turing machine was a hypothetical machine that he postulated in his paper. It's not a real machine because it can't ever exist in the way that he describes it because it relies on infinite memory, which is not a thing that's possible.
Interesting. And so what is the purpose of the Turing machine?
The Turing machine was a hypothetical machine that Alan, theorized that given an infinite memory, which in the case of his machine, in the 1930s, would have been an infinitely long tape of paper. Mm-hmm. And this machine you could input any algorithm, any set of, mathematical problems or rules, and it would be able to solve them. It could read the paper, do the calculations, and give you an answer.
Wow.
That was the basic Turing machine. It's the idealized version of a CPU, basically.
Okay.
So
how I've heard of the Turing test before.
Correct.
But I didn't realize it started from this. So how do we get from
Turing test is
a Turing machine to a Turing test?
Turing test is different, and we'll get there later.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right. I think I'm with you now. I think I'm with you. This Alan guy was real smart.
Real smart. He invented new forms of math. Smart.
Yeah.
So real smart dude.
I understand. I don't understand the new forms of math, but I do understand that this guy was a genius.
I don't understand the new forms of math either. So
I guess they're old forms of math now, but
if there are any mathematic experts in our listening pool, I would love to hear from them. And in fact, send us an email. And even if Claire's not interested, I'll put you on a Discord call and record it. And you can teach us about math and we can put it on Discord or something because that would be rad.
Ooh.
But anyway.
I like the idea of having guests on.
This episode of .fm is supported by our Patreon, duh. I mean, come on, you think a tiny trans podcast like us would have sponsors? I wish. No, we're supported entirely by our listeners. We're kind of like PBS that way, only queerer. Patreon.com/.fem. That's patreon.com/DOTFEMME.
Reacquiring signal.
So math wasn't the only thing that Alan did. In addition to all the mathematical work that he did, he also was very interested in cryptology and the study of codes and breaking codes and stuff like that. So in which, in the late 30s was becoming very important work because of a little thing that was starting to happen in Europe.
Are you referring to World War II?
Yeah. The Great War, the sequel. So
the sequel.
Oh. Yeah, so starting in late 1938, Alan actually worked part-time with the government code and cipher school called GC&CS. It was the British code-breaking organization housed at Bletchley Park, which they worked on cracking Nazi codes in World War II. Mm-hmm. So Alan actually, I don't know if he was the leading researcher, but he was definitely a leading researcher. And his particular focus was on the analysis of the Enigma machine and the breaking of the Enigma codes. So the Enigma machine was this German-made machine that Nazi Germany used to encrypt their messages, and it was considered uncrackable for kind of a really good reason. It used this 3-letter key to encode a message, and each key was changed every 24 hours. So the way it worked was you had this machine that honestly, it kind of looked like a fancy typewriter. It had like a full keyboard. And then above the keyboard, it had a bunch of lights with a letter on each light that kind of looked like almost like a second keyboard, but didn't, they weren't keys. They were just lights. And then on top of that, you had these 3 dials that were attached to these rotors that each had, the alphabet around it. So as you turned a dial, kind of like a combination lock, it would change, the letter in the viewport. And so you would randomly choose 3 letters to be the code cipher at the beginning of each day, like at 6 a.m. basically. And then when you pressed a key on the keyboard, it would, based on that 3-letter cipher, it would randomly scramble each key press to be a different key. But it wasn't a basic substitution cipher. It would change how it encrypted each key press after each key press. So you had to know where the cipher started at the beginning of the message. This is like the
3-body problem. It's like you can never figure out where, like, how the planets are going to move because you have to learn how they start. It's like
equally complicated, but very different problem. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're telling me that Alan is the guy who figured the whole thing out?
Alan, and there was a team of people that worked at Bletchley Park. So he didn't do it alone, but like he was like key to Bletchley solving this problem.
Okay.
So in 1939, the Polish Cipher Bureau was able to kind of figure out, they sort of reverse engineered how the Enigma machine worked. And then right before they were about to be invaded by Nazi Germany, they didn't want this particular information to get into the hands of the Nazis because they didn't want the Nazis to know that someone had cracked their Enigma codes.
Sure.
So it was like a week before Nazi Germany was planning to invade Poland, and Poland knew ahead of time because they had cracked the code. So they called the governments of Britain and France, and they were like, hey, we have like a working version of the Enigma machine. We have a bunch of notes. Do you want to buy it from us, please? And France was like, no, thanks, we're not interested. But Britain was very much like, yes, we'll fucking take that, because Britain was going through the Blitzkrieg at this time, and being able to figure out what the Nazis were saying was going to be very useful. So the British government sent a representative from Bletchley Park, which it wasn't Alan Turing, it was someone else, who went to a forest outside of Warsaw and met with, a representative from the Polish Cipher Bureau. And they gave the British the internal mechanisms and the wiring of the Enigma machine's rotors and this method to decrypting Enigma's messages. But this method that Poland devised was entirely relied on this sort of insecure indicator procedure that was likely to change in the future. And in fact, Nazi Germany did change this in the future in May 1940. So suddenly the Polish
had
method,
it cracked for 2 yeyears.
They didn't have it cracked for very long, but Alan kind of saw that this was going to be this may not last forever. Nazi Germany could, to use software terms, patch the problem at any time. So he tried to come up with this more general, a more general way to decrypt Enigma's messages in kind of real time. And it was using this method called crib-based decryption. And this method was something that Bletchley was using, a couple years prior. They were using crib-based decryption, but the problem was that they were doing it all manually. Crib-based decryption, I should first explain what that means. So crib-based decryption uses a plain text guess to try and learn about the constraints or the rules of the cipher. So it's, you would basically try to guess something that would be in the message and then try to figure out how that particular part of the message would be
so kind of like
decrypted.
reverse engineering it.
Yeah, kind of. And the way that they did this was it was done manually using what they called crib sheets. And these crib sheets would be long strips of paper that had the alphabet written at the top. And then, someone listening in to the telegraph lines coming from Nazi Germany would transcribe the message that they were hearing, which was, encrypted. So when they wrote it down, it looked like this random string of letters, right? And they would take these, printouts or I don't know if they were, written on a typewriter. I think they were, but they may have been handwritten as well. But they would take these printouts and then they would take their crib sheets and basically slide it along the message at the top until none of the letters matched up, which will be important. So, but I'm not sure I explained crib-based decryption very well, but there's a scene in the movie Zodiac by David Fincher that...
Ooh, can we watch it?
Yes, we're going to watch it right now.
Ooh, this'll help.
Yeah, this'll explain it much better.
What's the most common double consonant in the English language?
Consonant?
The double L.
Double L.
And what's the one word that we know that he'll use in here at least once?
Kill.
Right, kill. So the Hardens start looking for double symbols, which they find here, here, and here, each with the same two symbols preceding them. So now they've got a repeating four-letter word ending with two symbols that they assume stand for L.
And since I think the whole word is kill.
And you got your K, you got your I, and you're on your way.
So obviously that, movie was about the Zodiac killer, not Alan Turing. But it's a really good description of crib-based decryption. In the example that we just heard, Jake Gyllenhaal talks about, what's one word we know he'll use in the message. And in this particular example, it was the word kill because they're dealing with a coded message from a serial killer. In Alan Turing's version of this, what's one word we know that Nazi Germany is probably going to use in their messages, or a couple words maybe? Well, we do know a few.
Like maybe Hitler.
There you go. Hitler?
Hitler? Really?
The three words that they were able to look for pretty consistently was weather and Heil Hitler. Because at like 6 a.m. in the morning, they would usually, the first message sent would be a weather report for the day. 0600, weather clear kind of thing. So they knew that they could look for the word weather. And because Nazi Germany was hyper-nationalist, a lot of the operators would sign off their messages with Heil Hitler. So they
did them in.
They knew that they could look for the words weather, Heil, and Hitler. So they have their cribs, weather, Heil, and Hitler. And so all they have to do is try to figure out where in the message. Now, the Zodiac example that we just saw was a basic substitution cipher. That makes it a lot easier because, like you hear Jake Gyllenhaal say, you got your K, you got your I, and you're on your way. That's assuming that the same symbol that means K in one word also means K in a different word. But the Enigma machine, it changes it up after every letter press. So it doesn't work the same way. They had to find another way to make this work. And to kind of do that, Alan used this new, crib-based decryption method, and he created a machine called the Bombe, which there's a lot of speculation on why they called these machines bombs. Some people say that it was due to the incessant ticking noise while it was working, but realistically, it's because it was based off of a similar machine that the Poles had already made, and they called theirs the Bombe. So, it was probably that. But anyway.
Yeah, no.
Alan creates this...
Inspired.
Yeah. Alan creates this machine called the Bombe, and he uses this machine to help decipher the Enigma messages. And the Bombe was entirely automated, so they didn't have to manually go through these messages. The way that the Bombe worked is that it, like a lot of other computers, it worked electromechanically, and basically it would search for possible correct settings. These settings could be rotor order, it could be specific rotor settings, it could be plug board settings, the whole thing basically created a possibility of 100 quintillion possible settings for an Enigma machine.
I can go through that in a night.
Sure. So, if you're trying to manually decrypt an Enigma message by going through every possible setting one at a time, let's say you were able to test one setting every minute. How long would it take you to do that manually? It would take like 20 million years to try and every setting for one message. Obviously, that's not possible manually. So they were having a tough time doing this manually. Now, obviously, they weren't trying every single setting, but a manual test for a message could take anywhere between 4 to 6 hours. And by the time you figure out what that message means, the attack it's warning you
4 to
of
6 hours behind.
Yeah, it's not very fast. The bomb instead would test the message against a possible crib, and it would automatically rule out any setting that led to a contradiction. Now, a contradiction was actually pretty easy. It's the same way that they tried to find contradictions manually. The bomb was just doing it faster. And a contradiction used this particular quirk of the Enigma machine. And that quirk was any key that you press on the keyboard would never return the same key in the light.
Oh.
It would never decrypt, it would never encrypt a B to a B, for instance. So when they were sliding their crib sheets manually, if they ever got to a point where none of the letters matched up with each other across the message, they knew that was probably the setting, and they were able to put that possible setting into their replica Enigma machine, type in the message, and get the decrypted message back.
Yeah.
The bomb simply did that whole thing, but did it faster. It did it automatically. And so instead of taking 4 to 6 hours to decrypt a message, it would only take about 15 minutes to try and narrow down the possible settings. Now, the bomb didn't do the actual decryption. What it did was it basically tested all of the possible settings that it could based on the crib, weather, Heil, and Hitler, looking for those words in each message. And then it would spit out a much smaller list of possible settings that someone could then manually test, which usually was down to like 3 possible settings. So you could test it way faster. And so they were able to get a message decrypted in about 15 minutes instead of 4 to 6 hours. In fact, sometimes it was so fast that the British code breakers actually were able to decode the message before the German recipient could decode the message.
Oh.
So like,
that's useful.
It was pretty quick. Unfortunately, though, they were only able to do a certain number of messages per day because they had limited staff and they only had a limited number of these bombs running. In fact, by late 1940, they only had 2 of these bombs. So Alan and his fellow cryptanalysts at Bletchley, they wrote a letter on October 28th, 1941. They wrote it directly to Winston Churchill. And they asked, a fellow high up military employee to deliver it to Churchill for them, where they explained the difficulties they were having and the frustrations they were having. And Churchill ended up writing a memo to General Ismay, who was like the head commander of the British armed forces in World War II, in which this memo, Churchill wrote, "Action this day," all caps.
"Action this day. Make sure they have all they want. And report to me this has been done."
Yeah, and so by the end of the war, more than 200 bombs were in operation. So, they got to work pretty quick.
I like how we just, don't give each other shit anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, I love you, bestie. What happens next?
Alan basically invented the machine that cracked, the Enigma machine, which was thought to be unbreakable. And when they did that, it created this new, secret program in the British intelligence military that was called Ultra. And, I can't go into the full history of, breaking the Enigma machine. One, because Alan was only a small part of that, but also there are entire like full documentaries about breaking the Nazi codes. In fact, I watched a 2-hour documentary about breaking the Nazi codes for this episode, so I can't go into the whole thing.
Nice.
But
No.
towards the end of the war, in like November 1942, Alan traveled to the U.S. and assist U.S. Navy cryptanalysts on their own bomb construction. While he was in the U.S. during this trip, he visited the Computing Machine Laboratory in Dayton, Ohio. He also went to Bell Labs in New Jersey, where he assisted in the development of some secure speech devices, such as Sigsaly, which was also very important for Allied intelligence during the end of the war. And then in March of 1943, he returned to Bletchley Park. After his work at Bell Labs, when he was in the United States towards the end of the war, Alan moved to the Secret Service's Radio Security Service, later called Her Majesty's Government Communications Center.
Yeah.
Names change since World War II.
Yeah.
But while he was there, he worked with REME officer Donald Bailey, and together they designed and constructed a portable, secure voice communications machine that was codenamed Delilah. It was like a walkie-talkie that automatically like scrambles your voice so it can't be like intercepted or picked up.
I think my AI is called Delilah.
Sure. All right. Unrelated. But yeah, they worked on this codenamed Delilah project, and they showed that it worked. They demonstrated it successfully, but they completed it a little too late. It was like right at the end of the war, so it never got adopted for use. So by the close of World War II, Alan and his team at Bletchley they'd been instrumental in helping the Allied powers to victory. He had really taken the chaos of Enigma and turned it into a clarity that helped save countless lives.
Nice.
So
yeah, he seemed like a pretty cool guy.
Yeah, but in the piece that followed, there was this new kind of battle that was waiting for Alan. So, and this was a battle that Alan wouldn't be able to solve with a machine.
Hey, Danny, wait a minute. Are you telling me that this is going to be a two-parter?
This is a two-parter.
Oh.
We're doing 2 parts.
This is exciting.
So I think that's going to do it, at least for part 1 of Alan Turing. If you like this episode, let us know. If you're listening on YouTube, leave a like, subscribe, drop a comment down there. If you're listening on Spotify, you can comment there too now. That's pretty cool. So please let us know what you thought of the episode. You can find more episodes wherever you get your podcasts or directly on our website if you prefer at .fempodcast.com. If you really enjoy queer history and you want to help us preserve these kinds of stories, you can support us financially by supporting us on Patreon. And if you have suggestions for other queer histories that you would like us to cover, or, maybe you just want to send us a note saying hi, you can do that. You can send us an email on our website, or you could even send us some real life paper mail in a mailbox to our P.O. box address, which is also on our website. We love hearing from everybody, especially if you have like local queer history stories from your part of the world that we, probably haven't heard of. So definitely let us know. But with that, thanks for listening, and we will see you in 2 weeks for part 2 of Alan Turing. So
we'll catch
you next time.
Bye. See you.